In the summer of 1462, Sultan Mehmed II advanced toward Targovishte, the capital of Wallachia. 9 years earlier, Mehmed had conquered Constantinople. Now he was leading an Ottoman army north of the Danube against a much smaller principality whose ruler had openly rebelled against him. The capital was nearly empty, but outside it, the Ottoman soldiers found something impossible to ignore. People had been raised on stakes across the landscape. An Ottoman participant in the campaign later described large numbers of victims, including men, women, and children. The exact total cannot be established. The message could. Vlad III wanted the army approaching his capital to understand that this war would not be fought by ordinary rules. This was not a vampire legend. This was terror used as policy. And here is what makes Vlad difficult to understand. Many of the most grotesque stories told about him came from hostile sources and later sensational print. Some were exaggerated. Some may have been invented. But when historians remove the propaganda, the surviving evidence does not reveal a harmless ruler who was simply misunderstood. It reveals a prince who deliberately made cruelty part of how he governed and how he fought. Vlad was not king of Romania. Modern Romania did not yet exist. He was voivode or prince of Wallachia, a strategically vulnerable state between the expanding Ottoman Empire and the kingdoms and principalities to its north and west. He ruled it 3 separate times. And even his name tells us how quickly history became legend. Vlad's father was Vlad II, known as Dracula after joining the Order of the Dragon, a Christian chivalric order. His son could therefore be called Dracula, essentially the son of Dracula. Centuries later, Bram Stoker would use the name Dracula for a fictional vampire. But the historical Vlad did not drink blood or turn into a bat. He did not need to. The real source of his reputation was political violence. Vlad was born around 1431. As a boy, he and his younger brother Radu were sent into Ottoman custody as hostages, a common political tool intended to guarantee their father's loyalty. It is tempting to turn those years into a psychological origin story. Maybe captivity made Vlad cruel. Maybe Ottoman punishment taught him impalement. Maybe hatred of the Sultan began there. The problem is that we cannot prove any of that. Before we continue, my name is Noah. We built this channel for people who want the real story behind history's most infamous figures, not just the legends built around them. If that sounds like you, subscribe. It is free and it helps us make better videos, more than you might think. All right, back to Vlad. What we can prove is that Vlad grew up inside a frontier world where rulers could lose their throne quickly, where noble factions backed rival claimants, and where both Hungary and the Ottoman Empire could influence who ruled Wallachia. That instability shaped his life more reliably than any invented childhood diagnosis. Vlad's first reign came in 1448. It lasted only a short time. He returned to power in 1456, and this second reign is where the ruler remembered by history truly emerges. His first problem was authority. Wallachian boyars were not passive servants waiting for a prince to command them. Powerful noble families could influence succession, support rival claimants, and switch loyalties when it benefited them. Vlad responded by trying to make the throne more dangerous to oppose. He promoted men who depended on him. He punished rivals, and he used exemplary violence to make disobedience visible. Later stories claim that Vlad invited disloyal boyars to a feast, executed some, and forced others into brutal labor. The details vary and should not be treated as a perfect transcript, but the larger political pattern is clear. Vlad was reducing the room in which aristocratic rivals could safely challenge him. His violence did not stop with nobles. To the north, the Transylvanian Saxon towns had commercial interests in Wallachia and sometimes supported rival claimants to Vlad's throne. Vlad attacked their territory. Villages were burned. Merchants and captives were punished. And this is where the easy defense of Vlad begins to fall apart. If every atrocity story came only from distant writers inventing a monster, the historical problem would be simple. They did not. Contemporary hostile reports and later German narratives describe impalements connected with these campaigns. The exact numbers are difficult to recover, and some printed accounts clearly wanted the most shocking version possible. But this is where Vlad's reputation becomes complicated. Some of the most famous stories about him were propaganda. German language accounts portrayed him as a monster who boiled, mutilated, burned, and impaled people for almost any reason. Later printed pamphlets spread those stories through Central Europe with gruesome illustrations. They were early sensational media, and some details are almost certainly unreliable. So maybe Vlad was not really the monster history remembers. There is just one problem. The violence we can document is already enough. Collective impalement under Vlad was real. Punitive campaigns against political enemies were real. The use of terror against civilians and rival communities was real. What is uncertain is not whether he used extreme violence. It is how many victims later storytellers added, and which individual anecdotes they embellished to make the prince even more horrifying. Impalement itself was not invented by Vlad. Forms of it existed in the Ottoman world, in southeastern Europe, and elsewhere. Medieval governments also used public execution, mutilation, hanging, burning, and other exemplary punishments. Vlad's age was violent, but saying everyone was violent does not explain him away. What made Vlad distinctive was how repeatedly he turned punishment into spectacle. A victim on a stake did more than die. The body remained visible. It warned the next merchant, noble, soldier, or village about what resistance could cost. Cruelty became communication, and by the beginning of the 1460s, Vlad was about to use that language against an enemy vastly stronger than any boyar or merchant guild. For years, Wallachia had existed inside the Ottoman sphere of power and paid tribute. Vlad eventually stopped cooperating. He attacked Ottoman positions south of the Danube and devastated settlements along the frontier. In a letter describing his campaign, Vlad himself claimed an enormous number of enemy deaths. The exact figure should not be treated as a modern casualty report, but the raids were real, and they made a large Ottoman response almost inevitable. The opponent coming for him was Mehmed II. This mattered. Mehmed was not a minor regional warlord. He had captured Constantinople in 1453 and was building an empire across southeastern Europe. Vlad could not realistically meet that empire in a conventional open battle and expect numbers alone to save him. So he changed the kind of war he was fighting. Wallachian forces harassed the Ottoman advance. Resources were removed or destroyed. The countryside became difficult to supply from. Small forces could strike and disappear. And Vlad used fear as deliberately as he used terrain. Until now, much of his terror had been directed downward, against nobles, rivals, merchants, and communities he wanted to control. Now he was going to use terror against an empire larger than his entire principality. And his boldest plan was almost unbelievably simple. Enter the Ottoman camp at night, find the Sultan, kill him. The risk was enormous. A night assault could erase the numerical advantage of the larger army, but it could also erase the attacker's own command and control. In darkness, a successful raid could become panic in either direction. Vlad's advantage was local knowledge and surprise. The Ottomans' advantage was that their camp was not simply a crowd sleeping in an open field. It was a military system with guards, commanders, reserves, and troops capable of rallying once the first shock passed. The surviving accounts disagree on the exact sequence of the fighting, which makes cinematic reconstructions look more certain than the evidence allows. What they agree on is the essential point. Vlad went after the center of Ottoman power and failed to remove it. In June 1462, Vlad launched the famous night attack near Targovishte. His troops entered the Ottoman camp after dark, producing confusion in an army where identifying friend from enemy became difficult. The objective appears to have been Mehmed himself. Vlad failed to reach him. That point matters. The night attack was audacious. It was not the clean strategic victory later legend sometimes makes it. The Sultan survived. The Ottoman army did not disintegrate. Vlad could hurt the invasion. He could not destroy it in one stroke. So he returned to the strategy available to a weaker ruler. Delay, harass, deny supplies, make every kilometer unpleasant, make occupation cost more than conquest looked worth, and make the enemy afraid of what it would find next. Mehmed was also fighting a political war. He did not need every Wallachian noble to love the Ottoman Empire. He needed enough of them to decide that Vlad was the more dangerous choice, and Mehmed had an alternative ready. Vlad's younger brother Radu had spent years connected to the Ottoman court and could be presented as another Prince of Wallachia. As the campaign continued, Radu offered boyars a future in which they could abandon Vlad without abandoning the principality itself. That was a weapon Vlad's terror could not easily answer. The more his rule depended on personal fear, the more dangerous it became when a rival ruler appeared with the backing of a greater army. That brings us back to Targovishte. As Mehmed's army approached the Wallachian capital, it encountered the display from the opening of this video. Modern retellings often call it the Forest of the Impaled. Later sources attach spectacular numbers to the scene. A recent scholarly reassessment argues that the famous totals cannot simply be accepted at face value. But Ottoman testimony supports the essential fact that a major display of impaled victims existed during the campaign. The propaganda exaggerated him. The vampire myth fictionalized him. But neither was required to invent the central method. Vlad had deliberately turned dead bodies into part of the battlefield. The objective was psychological. An invading army expects resistance. It expects casualties. It does not expect the landscape itself to have been arranged as a warning. Yet even this did not give Vlad victory in the simple sense. Mehmed did not conquer Wallachia permanently in 1462, but Vlad's position collapsed. His younger brother Radu had taken a different political path. Radu had remained closely connected to the Ottoman court and now emerged as a rival ruler backed by Ottoman power. Wallachian elites began shifting towards him. Vlad lost support. He withdrew toward Hungary expecting assistance from King Matthias Corvinus. Instead, he was detained. The political reasons surrounding his imprisonment are complicated, and hostile documents were used to portray Vlad as unreliable. Whatever the exact maneuvering, the result was brutal in a different way. The man who had terrified Wallachia and resisted Mehmed spent years out of power. He had failed to create a political system that could survive without constant personal coercion. And this is the limitation hidden inside rule by terror. Fear can make opposition expensive. It can also make loyalty shallow. People obey while the ruler is strong. When a stronger patron appears, fear does not necessarily produce devotion. Vlad eventually returned. In 1476, with regional politics shifting again, he regained the Wallachian throne for a third time. The restoration was brief. Within weeks or months, he was dead. The exact circumstances remain uncertain. Some sources place his death in battle against Ottoman-backed forces. Later traditions say his head was sent to Mehmed as proof. Even Vlad's death refuses to separate cleanly from legend, and then the printing press helped make sure he would never disappear. German stories about Dracula circulated in manuscript and print, turning his cruelty into entertainment and moral horror. In other traditions, especially later Romanian nationalist memory, another Vlad emerged, a severe ruler, a defender of Wallachian independence, a prince willing to confront Ottoman expansion when larger states feared it. These two images are often presented as if one must destroy the other. Monster or hero, propaganda victim or sadistic tyrant. The historical answer is less comfortable. Vlad could resist Ottoman domination and deliberately terrorize civilians. He could try to strengthen a vulnerable principality and use cruelty to crush political rivals. He could be exaggerated by enemies without being innocent of the behavior that made exaggeration believable. One does not erase the other. And Bram Stoker complicates the picture again. When Dracula appeared in 1897, the fictional count became one of literature's most famous monsters. Stoker borrowed the name Dracula and fragments of Eastern European history. The modern fusion between Vlad the Impaler and the vampire became much stronger later through popular culture. So Vlad the Impaler was not Count Dracula. He did not drink blood. He did not possess supernatural powers. Some of the most grotesque stories told about him were hostile propaganda. Some casualty totals are impossible to verify. Some famous anecdotes appear only in sources written to shock their audience. But removing the vampire does not remove the terror. Removing the propaganda does not remove the impalements. Vlad deliberately used execution, spectacle, intimidation, and collective punishment to control nobles, punish enemies, devastate rival communities, and resist an empire much larger than his own state. That does not make him uniquely evil in all of human history. It makes him something more useful to understand. A ruler who discovered that fear could function as a political technology. His enemies exaggerated him because the truth was already useful enough to exaggerate. The fictional Dracula turned Vlad into a monster. The historical Vlad never needed the help.